Widow seeks suitor by letter. All flee at sight of 5 children. Until first Indian arrives and changes everything. Margaret held the pen firmly between her trembling fingers as she reread for the 10th time the words she had written on the yellowed paper. The advertisement was ready to be sent to the newspaper in the town of St. Helena Springs, in the countryside of Tennessee, but something inside her hesitated to take this final step. Necessity was greater than pride. 2 years ago, she had been left alone with 5 children to raise, and with each passing month, the situation grew more difficult. The money William had left was running out, and the small corn and bean farm barely supported the family. She took a deep breath and carefully folded the paper. She could no longer postpone this decision. The next morning, she took the old buggy and followed the dirt road leading to the town centre, her heart pounding in her chest. The office of the Valley Herald smelled of ink and old paper. Mr. Harold, the newspaper owner, greeted her with a kind smile, but she noticed curiosity in his eyes when he read the advertisement. Honest widow, 35 years old, owner of a small farm, seeks hard-working man of good character to start a family. Interested parties write to P.O. Box 247. Harold scratched his grey head and stared at her for a few seconds. Mrs. Margaret, are you sure you want to publish this? All kinds of people will show up. She nodded with determination, even feeling her cheeks grow warm. I have 5 children to raise, Mr. Harold. I need help. The man sighed and noted the advertisement in his notebook. It will be in Sunday's edition. May God protect you, Mrs. Margaret. Back at the farm, she gathered the children on the wooden porch of the simple house. Emily Grace, the eldest at 12, had the same blue eyes as her mother and already helped with her younger siblings. James Patrick, 10 years old, was the image of his late father, stubborn and protective. The twins, Sarah Elizabeth and Rebecca Ann, 8 years old, were chatty and curious. Little Timothy, just 4 years old, still asked for his father every night. Children, I need to talk to you about something important, began Margaret, smoothing the faded blue dress she wore on Sundays. I'm going to try to find someone who can help us here on the farm. Emily Grace looked at her seriously. Is Mother going to get married again? Perhaps, my child. If someone good comes along, who likes you all? James Patrick crossed his arms, suspicious. What if we don't like him? Then it won't work out, replied Margaret, pulling the boy close. Family is a serious matter. It has to be good for all of us. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out now continuing. The first response arrived just 3 days after publication. Margaret recognized the expensive envelope and the careful handwriting even before opening it. The man introduced himself as Richard Harrison, a fabric merchant from the neighboring town of Pleasant Grove. Dear Madam, the letter began, I read your advertisement with interest and would like to meet you in person. I am 42 years old, a widower with no children, and I own a prosperous store in the town centre. Could I receive you for a visit next week? Margaret felt her heart race. Could it be that someone had responded so quickly? She wrote a polite reply, scheduling the meeting for the following Saturday, and being honest about the 5 children. Saturday dawned sunny. Margaret woke before dawn to prepare the house and the children. She swept the yard, arranged the garden flowers, and baked fresh bread. The children were excited, running around the yard and constantly asking when the man would arrive. Around 2 in the afternoon, an elegant buggy stopped in front of the wooden gate of the property. Richard Harrison came down wearing a new black suit and carrying a bouquet of yellow flowers. He was a tall man with broad shoulders, a well-groomed moustache, and a serious demeanor. Margaret went to meet him, drying her nervous hands on her apron. Mr. Harrison, welcome. He politely removed his hat and handed her the flowers. Mrs. Margaret, it's a pleasure to meet you in person. You are even more beautiful than I imagined. At that moment, James Patrick and the twins came running from the back of the yard, shouting and playing tag. Timothy was right behind, trying to keep up with his older siblings. Emily Grace came out of the house carrying a basin of wet laundry to hang on the clothesline. Richard's smile vanished instantly. His eyes scanned the 5 children with an expression of shock and discomfort. He swallowed dryly and looked back at Margaret. "Mrs. Margaret," he stammered, "I must confess that, well, I didn't know there were so many children. In your letter you mentioned children, but I thought there would be, perhaps 2 or 3. Margaret felt her face flush with shame. "There are 5, Mr. Harrison, all mentioned in my letter." He fidgeted restlessly with his hat in his hands, avoiding looking at the children who had stopped playing and were watching them curiously. "I understand, but you see, my store demands a lot of time. I travel frequently to buy goods. I wouldn't be able to care for so many." Before Margaret could respond, he was already heading back to the carriage. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Margaret, but I don't think I'm the right person for this situation." And with that he left, leaving only a cloud of dust on the road and 5 children looking confusedly at their mother. Emily Grace approached and held Margaret's hand. "Mum, did we do something wrong?" "No, my dear, You did nothing wrong." Margaret hugged the girl, fighting back the tears that wanted to escape. "Sometimes people aren't ready for a big family like ours." That night, after putting all the children to bed, Margaret sat alone on the porch, looking at the stars. Maybe this whole idea was a mistake. Perhaps she should accept that she would raise the children alone, even if it was difficult. But 2 weeks later, another letter arrived. This time the sender was Frank Coleman, owner of a small auto repair shop in Riverside. His handwriting was simple, his words direct and honest. "Mrs. Margaret, I have been a widower for 3 years and work fixing cars and farm machinery. I own my home and have a stable life. I would very much like to meet you and your children. Would next Sunday be convenient?" This time, Margaret was even more specific in her reply. She described each child, their ages, personalities, and even mentioned their most common mischiefs. She wanted to make sure there would be no unpleasant surprises. Frank arrived promptly on Sunday, driving an old but well-maintained Chevrolet. He was a dark-skinned man of medium height, with large hands calloused from work. His smile was sincere, and his brown eyes conveyed kindness. "Mrs. Margaret," he greeted, removing his hat, "I brought some candies for the children. I hope they like them." The children approached shyly when they saw the sweets. Frank knelt to be at their level and patiently distributed the candies, asking each one's name. "This is James Patrick," Margaret introduced. "He's the most stubborn of them all." Frank laughed. "As stubborn as I was at his age. And these are the twins? Sarah Elizabeth and Rebecca Ann. This is Emily Grace, my helper, and little Timothy." They spent the afternoon talking on the porch. Frank talked about his work, how he had lost his wife in an accident, and his desire to have a family again. He showed genuine interest in the children, asking about school, their favorite toys, and each one's dreams. As the sun began to set, Emily Grace approached Frank with courage. "Are you going to be our new father?" Frank looked at Margaret and then back at the girl. "Well, that depends on you too. Would you like to have a new father?" The twins exchanged glances and whispered something to each other. James Patrick remained silent, watching. Timothy climbed onto Frank's lap without ceremony. "We want a father who lives here with us," said Emily Grace seriously. "Not a father who just comes to visit." Frank smiled and stroked the girl's blonde hair. "That's exactly what I want too." Margaret felt hope growing in her chest. Finally, someone who understood what a real family meant. During the following 2 weeks, Frank visited the family 3 times. He brought simple but useful gifts: a wooden doll he had made himself for Timothy, colorful ribbons for the twins, an adventure book for James Patrick, and a set of combs and small mirrors for Emily Grace. On the 3rd visit, when the children were more comfortable with him, Frank spoke alone with Margaret after they had gone to sleep. "Margaret, I need to be honest with you about something important," he began, nervously fidgeting with his hat. Her heart froze. Here came another disappointment. "I really like you and the children, that's true, but 5 children, it's a very big responsibility. Financially, it would be difficult for me to support such a large family." Margaret nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "I understand, Frank." "No, let me finish," he continued. "I have a proposal. What if we sent the 3 girls to a boarding school? It's a better education, and with only 2 boys it would be easier." "No." The answer came firm and immediate from Margaret's mouth. My children stay with me. All of them. Margaret, be reasonable. It's an opportunity for them. I said no. She stood up, indicating that the conversation was over. Thank you for the visit, Frank. He tried to argue a little more, but realizing her determination, he sighed and headed to the car. Think it over, Margaret. This might be your only chance to have a husband. She watched him leave with a broken heart, but without regret. Family wasn't meant to be divided. Family stayed together no matter the cost. The following week, Mrs. Constance, a neighbor known for her gossip, came over for coffee. She was a woman in her early 50s, thin and always dressed in black, with a way of speaking that made words sound like jabs. I heard another suitor left, she commented, stirring the sugar in her coffee with excessive force. News travels fast around here, replied Margaret, trying to remain polite. Margaret, dear, you need to be more realistic. No man will want 5 children that aren't his. If you lied in the letters, at least you could catch someone. Lying isn't my way, Mrs. Constance. The woman sighed dramatically. Then you'll be alone for the rest of your life. And these children will grow up without a father. Is that what you want? The words pierced deep into Margaret's heart. After the neighbor left, she was alone in the kitchen thinking. Was she being too stubborn? Should she consider separating the family if it meant security for everyone? That night, Emily Grace found her crying softly on the porch. Mother, are you all right? Margaret quickly wiped her eyes. Yes, my daughter, just a little tired. Is it because of the men who left? The girl sat down beside her. You don't need to find a husband for our sake. We help each other here. Margaret's heart filled with pride and pain at the same time. A 12-year-old girl shouldn't have to worry about such things. Emily Grace, you are children. You need to play, study, dream. You shouldn't worry about helping to support the household. But we're a family, Mother. Families help each other. In those simple words from her eldest daughter, Margaret found the strength she needed, no matter what others said. She would never split up her family. During the following weeks, she stopped responding to the other letters that arrived. She had lost hope of finding someone who would accept her reality. Instead, she focused her efforts on improving the farm's production. She planted a larger vegetable garden, expanded the chicken coop, and began making sweets to sell at the town market on Saturdays. The children helped each in their own way, and slowly the financial situation began to stabilize. It was during one of these markets, on a sunny April Saturday, that something changed her perspective. Margaret was arranging the pumpkin and guava sweets at her stall when she overheard a conversation at the next stall. 2 women were talking about her, thinking she couldn't hear. That's Margaret, the one who was looking for a husband in the newspaper, whispered one of them. I saw she stopped the ads. Must have given up, replied the other. Of course she gave up. A woman with 5 children has to take whatever comes along. If she were smart, she would have grabbed the first one that showed up. Margaret felt her face grow warm, but she continued arranging her sweets as if she hadn't heard anything. They say a merchant from Pleasant Grove was interested, but she was too picky. Picky? The first woman chuckled softly. In her situation, she can't afford to be picky at all. It was at that moment that Margaret turned to them with a polite but firm smile. Excuse me, ladies, but I believe you're talking about me. The 2 women turned red with embarrassment, but tried to cover it up. No, Mrs. Margaret, we were just... You were commenting on my personal life, she interrupted without losing her politeness. I'd just like to clarify one thing. I'd rather be picky and stay alone than accept anyone who isn't good for my children. A mother has that right. The women stammered some apologies and quickly moved away. Other people who had overheard the conversation looked at Margaret with respect. An elderly lady approached her stall. You're right, dear. Family is sacred. You don't just give yourself to anyone. That small show of support strengthened Margaret's determination even more. She returned home that day, certain that she had made the right decision. It was the following Monday that a letter different from the others arrived. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The handwriting was careful, the words chosen with care. The simple envelope had nothing special about it, but something about the way her name was written intrigued her. Mrs. Margaret, the letter began. "My name is Nathan Cherokee. I read your advertisement a few weeks ago and have been thinking ever since if I should write. I have been a widower for 4 years and work as a consultant in traditional agricultural techniques, teaching small farmers about sustainable land cultivation." Margaret paused her reading. The name was different, clearly indigenous. She continued reading with growing curiosity. "I lost my family under painful circumstances and understand what it's like to carry the weight of responsibility and longing alone. I don't have great material wealth, but I have knowledge about the land, about plants, and about how a family can thrive by living in harmony with nature." The words touched something deep in Margaret's heart. There was a sincerity in those phrases that she hadn't felt in the other letters. "If you'll allow me, I would like to meet you and your children. I believe a family is built with love, patience, and mutual respect." The number of children doesn't scare me. On the contrary, a house full of children's voices is a house full of joy. He ended the letter, asking for permission to visit her the following Sunday, if she agreed. Margaret read the letter 3 times before calling Emily Grace. "My daughter, another letter has arrived. This man seems different from the others." Emily Grace, who had witnessed the previous disappointments, looked at her with some skepticism. "Different how, Mother?" "He talks about family in a way that gives me hope." That night, Margaret wrote a response. This time she was even more honest than before. She told him about each child in detail, about the financial difficulties, about the fears and dreams of each child. She spoke about James Patrick and his need to be the man of the house, about Emily Grace and her early maturity, about the twins and their endless energy, about Timothy and his constant search for fatherly affection. She also told him about herself, about how she had been raised in a traditional family, about her happy marriage with William, about the mourning and the struggle to keep everything running on her own. Nathan's reply arrived 4 days later and brought even more surprises. Instead of backing away from the detailed information, he asked specific questions about each child. He wanted to know what James Patrick's favorite subject in school was, if Emily Grace liked to cook, if the twins preferred dolls or outdoor play, what kind of stories Timothy liked to hear. He also offered practical advice for the farm. He suggested a crop rotation that could increase soil productivity, talked about companion plants that protected each other from pests, mentioned composting techniques that would improve the quality of the land. "My first family," he wrote, "was made up of my wife and our young daughter. We lost both in an epidemic that hit our village. For a long time, I thought I would never be able to love again, but I learned that the heart has an infinite capacity for love when it finds the right people." Margaret felt her eyes fill with tears as she read those words. Finally, someone who understood the pain of loss and yet kept hope in love. During the week leading up to Nathan's visit, Margaret found herself more nervous than she had been with the other suitors. There was something in the sincerity of those letters that made her believe that this time could be different. But there was also another fear growing in her heart. His name, the knowledge about indigenous techniques mentioned in the letters. She suspected that Nathan might be Indian, and in St. Helena Springs in the 1950s, that meant prejudice and difficulties she couldn't even imagine. On the Friday before the visit, she gathered the children in the living room. "Children, on Sunday, a gentleman different from the others who have visited will come here." "Different how?" asked James Patrick, always direct. "Well, he might have customs different from ours, but that doesn't mean it's bad, understand?" The children looked at her, confused, but nodded. "What's important," Margaret continued, "is how he treats you and how you feel around him. It doesn't matter if he looks different or has different customs." Emily Grace, always the most perceptive, looked at her seriously. "Mother, is he Indian?" Margaret hesitated for a moment. "He might be, my daughter." "And if he is?" The girl shrugged. "I don't care. I just want him to be good to us." The twins nodded in agreement, and Timothy was more interested in the wooden doll he had received from Frank. James Patrick, however, remained silent, processing the information. Sunday arrived with a blue sky and bright sun. Margaret woke before dawn, tidied the house, made fresh bread, and put on her navy blue dress, the prettiest one she owned. Around 2 in the afternoon, she heard the sound of horse hooves approaching. Through the window, she saw a dark-skinned man riding a brown horse, simple but well kept. He dismounted gracefully and carefully tied the animal to the fence. Nathan Cherokee was a man of medium height, broad-shouldered, with long black hair tied in a braid that fell down his back. His dark skin shone in the sun, and his dark eyes conveyed serenity. He wore simple pants, a cotton shirt, and a worked leather jacket she had never seen the like of. Margaret took a deep breath and went out to greet him. Upon seeing her, he smiled in a way that lit up his whole face. "Mrs. Margaret?" he said, removing a simple felt hat. "It's an honor to meet you in person." His voice was soft, melodious, with a slightly different accent she couldn't place. "Mr. Nathan, welcome to our home." At that moment, the 5 children appeared. They had been peeking through the window and couldn't contain their curiosity. To Margaret's surprise, none of the children showed any strangeness or fear. On the contrary, they seemed fascinated by the visitor. Nathan knelt to be at eye level with the smaller children and smiled at each one. "You must be the 5 treasures your mother described to me in her letters." Timothy, always the most uninhibited, approached and touched Nathan's braid. "Your hair is just like the Indians in the picture book." Margaret blushed with embarrassment, but Nathan laughed heartily. "And you must be Timothy. Your mother told me you like adventure stories. I know many stories that your books don't tell." Timothy's eyes shone with curiosity. During the afternoon, Nathan captivated the children in a way Margaret had never witnessed. He told stories about forest animals, taught James Patrick how to make different knots with rope, showed the twins how to identify medicinal plants in the yard, and helped Emily Grace prepare an herbal tea that her grandmother had taught her. At dusk, when the children were playing in the yard, Nathan and Margaret sat on the porch to talk. "Your children are special," he said, watching the 5 play. "Each one has a unique light in their eyes." "They liked you very much," admitted Margaret. "I didn't expect it to be so easy." Children are wise. They sense when someone is sincere. They talked about the farm, about the difficulties of raising 5 children alone, about each child's dreams. Nathan showed deep knowledge about agriculture and genuine interest in helping the family prosper. "May I ask a personal question?" said Margaret as the sun began to set. "Of course." Are you an Indian?" Nathan looked at her for a moment before answering. "I am a descendant of the Cherokee Nation, yes. My great-grandmother was full-blooded indigenous. Does that bother you?" Margaret hesitated. It wasn't him that bothered her, but what the neighbors would say. "It doesn't bother me," she finally replied, "but I need to be honest. People around here may not accept it well." Nathan nodded with understanding. "I know it's a challenge. That's why I hesitated so much in responding to your advertisement. But your words in the letters touched me so deeply that I decided to take the risk." "Your words touched me too," confessed Margaret. "It had been a long time since I felt hope." When it was time for him to leave, the children made a fuss for him to stay longer. He promised to return the following week, if Margaret allowed it. After he left, the 5 children gathered around Margaret on the porch. "Mom, I really liked him," said Emily Grace. "He knows a lot of interesting things," added James Patrick. "And he promised to teach me how to fish with my hands," said Timothy excitedly. The twins nodded their heads enthusiastically in agreement. "And you?" asked Margaret. "Don't you think it's strange that he's different?" "Different why?" asked Sarah Elizabeth with innocence. "Because of his skin color and long hair?" "Mother," said Emily Grace seriously, "what matters is whether he's good or bad, and he seems very good." That night, Margaret slept with a lighter heart than she had felt in months. The following Monday, Mrs. Constance appeared again for morning coffee, but this time with a poorly disguised expression of curiosity. "Margaret, I heard you received another suitor on Sunday." "I did indeed," replied Margaret, serving the coffee naturally. "And how did it go?" "It went very well. The children liked him very much." Mrs. Constance stirred her sugar with excessive force, a sign that she was agitated. "I heard that he's not from around here." "He's not. He works visiting various farms, teaching agricultural techniques. But they say he has a somewhat strange appearance." Margaret stopped stirring her coffee and looked directly at her neighbour. "Mrs. Constance, if you have something specific to ask, you can ask directly." The woman was embarrassed for a moment. "Well, some commented that he looks Indian." "So what?" The reply came out firmer than Margaret expected. "Oh, Margaret, you need to think of the children. What kind of example is that? What will people think at school, at church?" Margaret rose from the table, indicating the conversation was over. "Mrs. Constance, my children will learn to judge people by their character, not by their skin color or origin. If that bothers anyone, it's not my problem." The neighbor left huffing, but Margaret remained firm in her position. She had already faced criticism for seeking a husband through advertisements. Now she would face it for choosing someone different from what was expected. During the week, Nathan sent another letter. This time it included small drawings he had made for each child: a bird for Emily Grace, a fish for James Patrick, flowers for the twins, and a horse for Timothy. He also sent special seeds that promised to yield fruits more resistant to drought and suggestions for improving the vegetable garden. His words were affectionate and full of hope for the future. The following Sunday, he arrived earlier and brought a surprise: a small wooden flute he had made for Timothy and straw dolls for the twins, all handmade with great care. "How do you know how to make these things?" asked Emily Grace, admiring the doll's delicacy. "My grandmother taught me when I was a child. She said that those who know how to make toys never leave a child sad." James Patrick, who had been more reserved during the first visit, began asking questions about the techniques Nathan had mentioned. "Do you really understand farming?" "I do. Would you like me to teach you some things?" The two spent the afternoon in the backyard, with Nathan explaining crop rotation, how plants help each other, and how to read the signs the land gives. "My family has always lived off the land," Nathan explained to the boy. "We learned that she is our mother, and like any mother, she needs care and respect to be able to feed us." James Patrick listened, fascinated. It was the first time someone spoke about farming in such a poetic and respectful way. At the end of the afternoon, when the children were distracted, Nathan asked to speak alone with Margaret. "Margaret, may I call you by your name?" "Of course." "Margaret, I need to be completely honest with you about something." Her heart tightened, fearing another disappointment. "I know my origin may cause problems for you and the children. I've faced prejudice before and know how difficult it can be." She listened to him in silence. "If you think it's better for me not to come back, I'll understand. I don't want you and the children to suffer because of me." It was Margaret's turn to be silent for a few moments, organizing her thoughts. "Nathan," she said finally, "my whole life I've been taught to follow what others expected of me. I married someone my family approved of. I behaved as an exemplary wife and mother should." He listened to her attentively. "But since William passed, I've learned that life is too short to live according to others' expectations. What matters is what makes my family happy and safe." "And do I make you happy?" he asked with vulnerability in his voice. "You do," she replied without hesitation. "For the first time in a long while, I see genuine joy in my children's eyes, and in mine too." The smile that spread across Nathan's face was like a sunrise. "So you'd like me to keep visiting?" "I'd like that very much." From that conversation on, Nathan's visits became regular. Every Sunday he'd arrive late morning and stay until dusk. He always brought something special: a natural remedy for Timothy's cough, a new cornbread recipe he'd learned from a lady at another farm, different seeds to try in the vegetable garden. Slowly, he became part of the family's routine. The children began counting the days until Sunday, and Margaret found herself smiling for no reason during the week. One Sunday in May, Nathan arrived with a different proposal. "What do you say we go fishing at the creek? It's a perfect day for it." The children were thrilled. They'd never been fishing before, and the idea of a different adventure excited them. They all walked together to the creek that ran behind the property. Nathan taught each child how to make a simple fishing rod with flexible branches, line, and hooks he'd brought. "Fishing," he explained while showing how to tie the hook, "requires patience. The fish only comes when it senses you're at peace." James Patrick was the first to catch a small fish. His joy was so great he shouted for the whole farm to hear. "I caught a fish! I caught a fish!" Nathan laughed and helped him bring the fish to the bank. "Well done, James Patrick. Now let's thank the fish for feeding us and then release it back to the creek." "Release it?" The boy didn't understand. "This fish is too small. It still needs to grow and have babies. We only take what we need and only when we need it." James Patrick released the fish into the water and watched it swim back to the depths of the creek. Emily Grace was next to catch a fish, a slightly larger one that Nathan said was good for lunch. The twins fished together, one holding the rod and the other watching the line. Timothy tried fishing with his hands, as Nathan had mentioned on his first visit, but ended up just getting all wet and laughing a lot. Margaret watched from afar, sitting on a large rock, her heart overflowing with happiness. It had been a long time since she'd seen her children so free and joyful. On the way back home, Nathan walked beside Margaret while the children ran ahead, still excited about the experience. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For giving my children back their childhood. They had to grow up too fast after their father passed. Today I saw they're still children." "A child who doesn't play doesn't grow right," he replied. "Joy is food for the soul." That evening, after baking the fish they'd caught, the whole family gathered on the porch to listen to Nathan tell stories about his childhood in the village. "When I was James Patrick's age," he began, "my grandfather used to take me fishing in the big river that ran near our village. He taught me that every time we took something from nature, we needed to give something back." "Give what?" asked Timothy, nestled in Margaret's lap. "Gratitude, respect, care. Sometimes we'd plant a tree, sometimes we'd clean the riverbanks, sometimes we'd just sit quietly giving thanks." The children listened, fascinated. It was a completely different world from what they knew, but one that made sense in their young hearts. "Mr. Nathan," said Emily Grace, "do you still have family in the village?" A shadow of sadness passed through his eyes. "I don't have any family there anymore, Emily Grace. Many have left over the years. That's why it's so special to be able to be part of your family." James Patrick, who had become very attached to Nathan, approached him. "Are you part of our family now?" Nathan looked at Margaret, seeking approval before answering. "If your mother agrees, I would very much like to be." All the children looked at Margaret expectantly. She felt the time had come for an important decision. "Children," she said, choosing her words carefully, "would you like Nathan to become a real part of our family?" A chorus of yes echoed across the porch. "And you, Nathan?" she asked, looking into his eyes. "Are you sure you want to face the challenges that this means?" "I'm sure," he replied without hesitation. "You are already my family in my heart." That night, after Nathan had left and the children had gone to sleep, Margaret stayed alone on the porch, thinking about the future. For the first time in 2 years, she could imagine a tomorrow full of possibilities. But the challenges would not be long in coming. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The following Monday, James Patrick came home from school with a bruised face and dirty clothes. Margaret immediately realized something had happened. "James Patrick, what happened?" The boy hesitated before answering, clearly embarrassed. "Some boys at school said bad things about Mr. Nathan." Margaret's heart tightened. "What kind of things?" "They said he's an Indian, and that Indians are no good for marrying people like us. They said you're bringing shame to the family." Margaret knelt down to be at her son's eye level. "And you fought because of that?" James Patrick lowered his head. "They were speaking badly about you and Mr. Nathan. I couldn't just stand there." On one hand, Margaret felt proud of her son's loyalty. On the other, she worried about the consequences this could bring. "Son, I understand you wanted to defend us, but violence is never the answer. Tomorrow, you will apologize to the boys." "But Mom..." "No arguments, James Patrick. You will apologize for the fight, but not for your feelings. There's a difference." On Tuesday, Margaret accompanied her son to school to speak with the teacher, Mrs. Dorothy, a middle-aged lady who had been teaching for many years. "Mrs. Margaret," said the teacher with a forced smile, "I need to speak with you about James Patrick. I imagine it's about yesterday's fight." "Yes, but not just about that. Some mothers have been coming to me concerned about the influence your personal choices might have on the other children." Margaret felt her blood boil, but remained calm. What kind of influence, Mrs. Dorothy? Well, you know, a relationship with someone of different origins can confuse the children about traditional family values. Mrs. Dorothy, Margaret replied firmly, my children are learning the most important values: respect, kindness, honest work, and true love. If that confuses anyone, the problem isn't with my values. The teacher looked uncomfortable but persisted. I understand your position, Mrs. Margaret, but you need to understand that we live in a small community. Certain attitudes can cause discomfort. And I'm supposed to live my life based on other people's discomfort? The conversation ended without a satisfactory conclusion for either of them. Margaret returned home with a heavy heart, knowing the difficulties were only just beginning. That afternoon, Emily Grace came home from school also upset. Mom, the teacher asked some strange questions today. What kind of questions? She asked if Mr. Nathan lived here in our house, if he was teaching us strange things, if you were thinking about marrying him. Margaret sighed. The situation was spreading faster than she had imagined. And what did you say? I said that Mr. Nathan only comes on Sundays, that he teaches us very good things about plants and animals, and that if you marry him, we'll be very happy. Margaret hugged her daughter, proud of her honesty and courage. That night, after putting the children to bed, she wrote a letter to Nathan telling him about the incidents at school. She wanted to be transparent with him about the difficulties they would face. The reply came 2 days later, along with an unexpected visit. Nathan showed up on a Thursday afternoon outside his usual schedule. He was accompanied by an older gentleman with graying hair and a dignified bearing. Margaret, said Nathan, I'd like to introduce my uncle, Thomas Cherokee. The older gentleman approached with a gentle smile. Mrs. Margaret, it's an honor to meet you. Nathan has told me a lot about you and the children. The 5 children gathered curiously around the visitors. Thomas had the same serenity as Nathan, but with the wisdom that comes with age. I came here, explained Thomas, because I heard about the difficulties you're facing due to the community's prejudices. Margaret was surprised. How did you find out? News travels fast, especially when it involves our people. I wanted to talk with you about a possibility. They sat on the porch while the children played in the yard. Mrs. Margaret, there's a community about 40 kilometers from here, near the town of Riverside, where several families live in harmony. Indigenous families, mixed-race families, some Italian families that arrived a few years ago. There, nobody cares about anyone's background. Margaret listened with interest. If you and Nathan decide to join together, you'd be very welcome there. There's good land for farming, a school for the children, and people who value family above all else. The offer was tempting, but also frightening. It would mean leaving everything she knew behind. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Thomas, but this land belonged to my husband. It has my family's history. The older man nodded with understanding. I understand. The land holds memories, and leaving memories behind is difficult. But, he continued, if the situation here ever becomes unbearable, know that there's a place where you can start over. After the 2 men left, Margaret talked with the children about Thomas's proposal. Would you like to live somewhere else? She asked. With Mr. Nathan? Asked Timothy. Yes, with Nathan. The children looked at each other. Emily Grace was the first to speak. Mum, if the people here don't want us to be happy, maybe it's better to go where happiness is welcome. Her 12-year-old daughter's wisdom surprised her once again. James Patrick agreed. If there's a school there and no boys who speak ill of our family, I want to go. The twins and Timothy also showed excitement about the possibility of an adventure. But before Margaret could make any decision about moving, a new challenge appeared. The following Friday, Father Harold showed up at her house for an unannounced visit. He was a thin, serious man in his 50s who had led the town's parish for over a decade. Mrs. Margaret, he said after formal greetings, I've come here as a pastor of the community, concerned about your soul and those of your children. Margaret offered coffee, but he refused. I've been receiving concerning reports about your recent personal choices, he continued. What choices, Father? Your relationship with this man, this Indian. You are setting a terrible example for your children and the entire community. Margaret felt her anger rise but tried to maintain respect. "Father Harold, I see nothing wrong with my conduct. Nathan is a hard-working, honest man who is kind to my children. But he is not a Christian, Mrs. Margaret. His people have pagan beliefs, rituals that go against the church's teachings. Nathan has never tried to influence my children against the Christian faith," she defended herself. "Not yet. But what about when you marry? When he wants to teach indigenous customs to the children, will you allow your children to turn away from God?" The conversation continued for almost an hour, with the priest trying to convince her to end the relationship, and Margaret defending her choice. When he left, she felt exhausted and confused. That night, Emily Grace found her mother crying softly in the kitchen. "Mother, what's wrong?" "Nothing, my daughter. I'm just a little tired." "Is it because of the people who don't like Mr. Nathan?" Margaret looked at her daughter, impressed by her perception. "How do you know?" "I see how sad you get after people come to talk to you, and at school, some children make mean comments." Margaret pulled her daughter close. "Emily Grace, do you think I'm doing the right thing?" The girl thought for a few moments before answering. "Mother, you always taught us that we should judge people by what they do, not by who they are. Mr. Nathan has always been kind to us, taught us good things, and makes you smile. To me, that's what matters." Once again, her daughter's wisdom impressed her. The following Sunday, when Nathan arrived for his usual visit, Margaret decided to be completely honest with him about all the pressures she was facing. They talked at length on the porch after the children went to play in the yard. "Nathan, I need you to know exactly what we're facing," she began, and told him about the problems at school, the priest's visit, the neighbors' comments. He listened to everything in silence with a serious expression. "Margaret," he said when she finished, "I never want you and the children to suffer because of me. If it's better for me to step away—" "No!" The answer came out stronger than she expected. "Sorry, I didn't mean to shout, but I don't want you to leave." "Then what are we going to do?" "We'll face this together. If we decide to stay here, we'll prove to all these people that true love is stronger than prejudice. If we decide to leave, we'll go to a place where we can be happy." Nathan held her hands in his. "Are you sure? You won't regret it." "I'm sure. You gave me back hope, brought joy back to my children. I won't give that up because of small-minded people." At that moment, they made the decision to face adversity head-on. The following weeks brought new challenges. Some town merchants began treating Margaret coldly when she went shopping. At church, some families moved away when she sat nearby. But they also brought positive surprises. Mrs. Catherine, an Italian lady who lived on the outskirts of town with her family, appeared at the farm on a Tuesday afternoon. "Mrs. Margaret," she said in her distinctive accent, "I came here to meet you and offer my friendship." Mrs. Catherine had heard about Margaret's situation and identified with her. When she arrived from Italy 20 years earlier, she had also faced prejudice for being a foreigner. "People are afraid of what's different," she explained as they had coffee, "but different doesn't mean bad." Mrs. Catherine's friendship was a relief to Margaret. Finally, someone who openly supported her. Other surprises came from Father John, a young seminarian who was doing pastoral work in the area. Unlike Father Harold, Father John had a more open view of different cultures. "Mrs. Margaret," he said during a visit, "God created all peoples. If this man is good for your family, who are we to judge?" Slowly, Margaret realized that not everyone in the community was against her. Some people just followed the majority opinion out of fear of standing out. Nathan also faced his own challenges. Some farmers who used to hire his services began avoiding him. His income decreased considerably, but he found unexpected support from Mr. George, Mrs. Catherine's husband. The Italian farmer was impressed with Nathan's knowledge and hired him to help improve the productivity of his land. "This man knows more about farming than many who call themselves experts," George commented to other farmers. Gradually, the techniques taught by Nathan began to show impressive results on George's farm. Other producers started to take an interest in his methods. In July, news arrived that would change everything. The state government had launched a program to encourage sustainable agriculture, offering special credit to small farmers who adopted ecological techniques. Nathan learned of the opportunity through his contacts in other regions and immediately thought of Margaret. "This could be our chance," he said during a Sunday visit. "With this funding, we can turn your farm into an example of sustainable production." Margaret was excited about the possibility. "But will they approve the credit for me?" "Let's try. You have land, you have a hard-working family, and I have the technical knowledge. Together we can present a convincing project." They spent weeks preparing the necessary documentation. Nathan drew up a detailed plan of how they would transform the small property into a model farm, using ancient indigenous techniques combined with modern soil conservation methods. The project included crop diversification, creating a composting system, installing rainwater harvesting cisterns, and establishing a medicinal garden. When they finally submitted the project to the responsible agency, the technician who assisted them was impressed. "I've never seen such a detailed and well-founded plan," he commented. "If you can implement this, it will be an example for the entire region." While they waited for the response, life on the farm continued. The children had adapted well to the techniques Nathan had taught them. James Patrick had become an expert in composting, Emily Grace mastered the cultivation of medicinal herbs, and the twins loved caring for the animals using more natural methods. Timothy, the youngest, followed Nathan everywhere like a little apprentice, absorbing knowledge about plants, animals, and the cycle of nature. In August, the response came. The project had been approved. The news spread quickly through the community. Some neighbors who had criticized Margaret now showed curiosity and even envy. "I heard you got that government funding," Mrs. Constance commented during one of her visits, this time with a less critical tone. "Yes, we did," Margaret replied proudly, "and that you're going to turn the farm into something modern. We're going to improve production using sustainable techniques that respect nature." Mrs. Constance was silent for a few moments. "Perhaps I was hasty in some of my comments about your boyfriend." It was the closest to an apology Margaret would receive from her neighbor. With the funding approved, the renovations on the property began. Nathan coordinated the work, always explaining to the children the reason for each change. "Let's plant this row of trees here," he explained to James Patrick, "to protect the vegetable garden from strong winds and at the same time provide shelter for the birds that eat the insects attacking the crops." It was a practical education about ecology that the children would never receive in a traditional classroom. During the work, several people from the region came to learn about the project. Some out of curiosity, others out of genuine interest in learning. Mr. Raymond, a traditionally conservative farmer, was impressed with the preliminary results. "Nathan," he said during a visit, "could you take a look at my property? I'm having trouble with pests and the pesticides aren't working." It was the first public recognition of Nathan's skills by the local community. In September, when the first improvements began to show visible results, even Father Harold changed his tone. "Mrs. Margaret," he said during a Sunday Mass, "I see that God is blessing your property. Honest work is always rewarded." It wasn't exactly an endorsement of her relationship with Nathan, but it was an acknowledgement that they were on the right path. The children also noticed the change in people's attitudes. James Patrick came home from school excited one October afternoon. "Mum, today my science teacher asked me to explain to the class how the composting we do here at home works." Emily Grace had a similar experience. "My teacher said I know more about medicinal plants than many adults." Gradually, the children went from being targets of prejudice to examples of practical knowledge at school. In November, an unexpected visitor arrived who would definitively change the community's perception of Nathan. An elegant, middle-aged man, driving an expensive car, stopped in front of the property. He introduced himself as Dr. Charles Mitchell, an agronomist from the State University. "Mr. Nathan Cherokee?" he asked. "That's me." "My name is Charles Mitchell. I'm a professor at the College of Agriculture. I heard about your work here in the region and came to see it in person." Nathan received him cordially, but clearly surprised by the visit. "Professor, what does a university doctor want with me?" "I want to learn, Mr. Nathan. Your techniques are producing results that we, with all our theory, cannot achieve." For 3 hours, the university professor asked detailed questions about Nathan's methods, constantly taking notes. "Mr. Nathan," he said at the end of the visit, I would like to invite you to give a lecture at the university for our agriculture students. Nathan was speechless for a few seconds. Professor, I don't have a university degree. I learned all this from my ancestors. Exactly why your knowledge is so valuable. Our students need to learn that wisdom doesn't only come from books. The news that Nathan had been invited to lecture at the university spread like wildfire through the region. Suddenly, the man many saw as an ignorant Indian was recognized as an expert by a respected institution. The prejudice didn't disappear completely, but now it was mixed with respect and admiration. In December, with the farm transformed and producing excellent results, Nathan gathered the courage to take the definitive step. On a full moon night, after the children had gone to sleep, he asked Margaret to marry him. "Margaret," he said, kneeling on the porch, "you gave me back the hope of having a family. Will you marry me?" There was no expensive ring or elaborate ceremony, just the sincere promise of love and companionship. "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "I very much do." The 5 children, who were listening hidden behind the door, burst into celebration. The wedding was scheduled for January, right after the summer harvest. Margaret decided the ceremony would be held at the farm itself, under the large mango tree in the center of the property. It would be a simple celebration, but full of meaning. The children actively participated in the preparations. Emily Grace made the flower arrangements. James Patrick prepared the ceremony site. The twins handmade the invitations, and Timothy chose the music. To Margaret's surprise, many people who had initially opposed the relationship showed interest in attending the celebration. Mrs. Catherine and her husband George offered to prepare the banquet. Father John, who had supported the couple from the beginning, would officiate the ceremony. Even Mrs. Constance asked to help with the decorations. A week before the wedding, Thomas arrived accompanied by several members of Nathan's indigenous family. They came to meet the bride and participate in the celebration. The children were fascinated by the visitors. It was the first time they had seen a complete indigenous family, with people of all ages. "Are you going to be our new family?" Timothy asked an elderly woman named Ayana, Nathan's distant grandmother. "You are already our family," she replied, hugging the boy. "Family isn't just blood, it's love and care." During the 3 days leading up to the wedding, the two families blended naturally. The children learned traditional songs and dances, listened to ancestral stories, and participated in gratitude rituals to nature. Margaret felt accepted and loved in a way she had never experienced before. On the eve of the wedding, the women of Nathan's family prepared a special ritual for her. It was nothing that contradicted her Christian faith, just a welcoming ceremony to the new family. "Margaret," Ayana said, "you are not just marrying Nathan. You are joining our entire lineage. We accept you and your children as our own." It was a moving moment that definitively sealed her integration into the new family clan. The wedding day dawned clear and sunny. The farm was decorated with wildflowers and colorful fabrics. The makeshift altar under the mango tree was surrounded by candles and arrangements made by the children themselves. At 4 in the afternoon, with about 50 people present, the ceremony began. Margaret wore a simple white cotton dress that she had sewn herself. Nathan wore dark pants and a linen shirt with a worked leather vest that had belonged to his grandfather. The 5 children participated in the ceremony as pages and maids of honor. Each carried a symbol. Emily Grace carried a bouquet of aromatic herbs. James Patrick carried a small tree that would be planted after the ceremony. The twins scattered flower petals along the path, and Timothy carried the rings on a small cushion made by his mother. Father John conducted a moving ceremony that blended Christian elements with respectful indigenous traditions. "Marriage," he said, "is the union of 2 people who choose to walk together, supporting each other and building something greater than the sum of their individual parts." When it was time for the vows, Nathan spoke first. "Margaret, I promise to be a good husband to you and a good father to James Patrick, Emily Grace, Sarah Elizabeth, Rebecca Ann, and Timothy. I promise to work every day to deserve the trust you have placed in me." Margaret, with tears in her eyes, replied, "Nathan, I promise to be a good wife and partner. I promise to respect your culture and your traditions and to help our children grow proud of their dual heritage." When the rings were exchanged, the entire assembly applauded emotionally. Even some people who had been critical of the relationship were visibly touched by the sincerity of the moment. After the official "I do," a party followed that lasted late into the night. There was music, dancing, plenty of food, and much joy. The children were the stars of the party, performing the dances they had learned from Nathan's family and singing songs that Emily Grace had composed for the occasion. When the party ended and the guests departed, the new family gathered on the porch for a moment of gratitude. "Thank you," said Margaret, looking at each of her children and her new husband. "Thank you for teaching me that family is made of love, not social conventions." Nathan embraced them all in a group hug. "Now we are a complete family." In the months following the wedding, life on the farm flourished like never before. Agricultural production increased significantly, the financial situation stabilized, and the children grew up in an environment rich in knowledge and love. James Patrick excelled in school in natural sciences and began giving informal lessons to other boys about sustainable farming. Emily Grace developed a special talent for natural medicine and helped neighbors with homemade teas and ointments. The twins became skilled in raising animals using eco-friendly methods. Timothy grew up bilingual, speaking English and Cherokee with equal fluency. The farm became a landmark in the region. University students came for internships, other producers sought guidance, and tourists interested in sustainable agriculture took guided tours. Nathan began giving regular lectures at the university and was invited to participate in conferences in other cities. His reputation as an expert in ecological agriculture grew far beyond the borders of St. Helena Springs. Margaret, who had initially only sought someone to help support the family, discovered she had found much more. A true life partner, a devoted father for her children, and a new perspective on the world. The community that initially resisted the relationship gradually changed its stance. Many neighbors who had been critical now sought the family's friendship and openly admired the property's success. Mrs. Constance, who had been one of the most vocal critics, became a fervent supporter of the couple. "I was wrong," she admitted in a conversation with other neighbors. "I judged by appearances and almost missed the opportunity to get to know one of the best families in the region." Father Harold also reconsidered his positions. In a Sunday homily, he spoke about how God works in mysterious ways and how sometimes wisdom comes from where we least expect it. 3 years after the wedding, the farm had completely transformed. What was once a small property with financial difficulties had become a model of sustainability and prosperity. The family had grown not only in unity, but also literally. Margaret was pregnant with the couple's first child. When the news spread, the whole community celebrated. The 5 older children were thrilled at the prospect of having a brother or sister. "Will it be a boy or a girl?" asked Timothy, now 7 years old and speaking confidently about farming and nature. "It doesn't matter," replied James Patrick, already a teenager and proudly assuming his role as the older brother. "We'll teach everything we learned from Father Nathan." Emily Grace, almost 15, had become a wise and mature young woman. This child will grow up in a family that knows love is stronger than any prejudice. The baby was born in October, during the most abundant harvest the farm had ever experienced. It was a girl who was named Hope. When Margaret held her newborn daughter in her arms, she remembered that day, years before, when she had written the advertisement in the newspaper, with trembling hands and a heart full of fear. Now, surrounded by a united and prosperous family, in a community that respected and admired her, she knew that all the hardships faced had been worth it. Nathan held his daughter with infinite tenderness, humming softly a lullaby in Cherokee that his grandmother had sung to him as a child. The 5 older children took turns helping with their little sister, each bringing their own unique gifts to enrich the family even more. That evening, with the whole family gathered on the porch looking at the stars, Margaret reflected on the extraordinary journey they had taken. "Nathan," she said, "do you remember the first letter you wrote me?" "I do. I was afraid you wouldn't accept someone like me. And I was afraid no one would accept a family like mine." They laughed together at the irony. "In the end," said Nathan, "we found we didn't need to change who we were. We just needed to find the right people to love and be loved by. James Patrick, who had overheard the conversation, approached his parents. "Father Nathan, when I grow up and have a family, I want it to be just like ours." "And what is our family like, James Patrick?" The boy thought for a few moments before answering. "Our family is made of true love, respect for differences, honest work, and caring for each other. It's a family where no one has to pretend to be something they're not." Emily Grace joined the conversation. "And it's a family that proves people can change, grow, and learn to be better." The twins, now 11 years old, added, "It's a family that shows different isn't bad, it's special." Timothy, always the most direct, concluded, "Our family is happy because they truly love each other." In those simple words from their children, Margaret found the perfect summary of everything they had achieved. Years later, when Hope was already walking and speaking her first words in English and Cherokee, the farm received a special visit. A group of journalists from the capital arrived to do a story on sustainable agriculture in rural Tennessee. "How did you manage to turn a small property into a state reference?" asked the lead reporter. Nathan and Margaret exchanged glances, smiling. "We combined ancestral knowledge with modern love," replied Nathan, "and we decided that the family's happiness was more important than other people's opinions," added Margaret. The story, when published, brought even more recognition to the family and the region. St. Helena Springs became known not only for its tradition, but also for its capacity for innovation and acceptance. The property of the Cherokee Coleman family, as they came to be known, became a must-visit destination for students, researchers, and the curious interested in sustainable agriculture and family harmony. But for Margaret, Nathan, and the 6 children, the greatest success wasn't in the external recognition. It was in the joy of waking up every day in a house full of love, laughter, and possibilities. In the evening, when they gathered all the children for dinner around the large table that Nathan had built, Margaret sometimes got emotional thinking about the journey that had brought them there. From a desperate widow seeking help through a newspaper ad, she had become a fulfilled woman, mother of 6 extraordinary children, and wife to a man who loved her exactly as she was. Nathan, who had tragically lost his first family, found not just a new family, but an entire community that learned to value his wisdom and kindness. The 5 children who needed a father found much more. They found a mentor, a friend, an example of dignity and unconditional love. And the community of St. Helena Springs, which almost lost one of its most valuable families because of prejudice, learned an important lesson about acceptance, tolerance, and the wealth that comes from diversity. End of story. And you, dear listener, what did you think of this story of overcoming and true love? Tell us in the comments if you believe Margaret made the right decision by fighting for her happiness. Leave your like if the story touched your heart and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other emotional stories like this one. Your opinion is very important to us.